Welcome to the Real Bible Rob podcast, and I'm so delighted to have Adina Meyer with me again. And I'll just start by saying a couple of words here. My New Testament professor, Dr. Nijay Gupta, has written much about Galatians and is endlessly fascinated with Paul's letter to them. And I didn't exactly understand this when I was in his classes. Why was this angry letter so important? Like many Christians, I usually favored Ephesians and Philippians, maybe Timothy, but Galatians? Why? Well, it's pivotal as a early window into the first major crisis that Paul encountered in which he had to intervene. The relationship between Jewish converts and Gentile converts in the early church. And my friend Adina Meyer it just finished a whole series of sermons on Galatians. So she's the perfect person to have this conversation with and about the changing views of the letter and why it's so important. So welcome once again, Adina, and I so look forward to hearing what you have to say about Galatians.
Thanks, Rob. I'm so happy to be on your podcast again. It's so much fun.
So great. Can you tell us a little bit about the structure of your sermon series and why you chose to do it in that way?
So it's interesting. You were just sharing that Bible study book about Galatians that starts with chapter 3, and I had 4 sermons. The first one was about chapter 3. Mm-hmm. And which I think is the sort of climax of the letter, where there's the famous passage in Jew or Greek, there is no male or female, there is no slave or free, but all are one in Christ Jesus. So that was my first sermon. Mm-hmm. Then I went back and talked about the very beginning of the letter and what it meant and the purpose of the letter, Paul's mission in the letter. And I think this sort of entry point into the letter is when he talks about Jesus came to rescue us from this present evil age. Mm-hmm. So that's the beginning. Then my third sermon was about chapter 5, where he talks about the flesh versus the spirit. And I talked a lot about what does he mean by flesh. A lot of people love to make this about sex.
Yeah, of course.
Don't your desires of the flesh. And I talked about how the word in Greek sarx for flesh is, yes, it includes sexual sin or sexual misconduct, but it's so much more than that.
Yeah.
And it's a spirit. I used a lot of theology from Walter Wink. The idea that the spirit of sarx is something that takes an institution that was originally created for good and makes it into, frankly, evil. So I used a couple of examples, like the healthcare system in this country, which was created to give people healthcare and now prevents people from getting healthcare. Or the Environmental Protection Agency currently, which was created to protect the environment and now tries to destroy the environment by getting rid of the fossil fuel endangerment clause. My final sermon was the climax, the end of the letter in chapter 6, where he ends with this beautiful statement: neither circumcision nor uncircumcision is anything, but a new creation is everything. So I talked about what that meant. So those were my 4 sermons.
Well, it's interesting because Scot McKnight talks about sort of the difficulty of understanding Paul and inscrutability of Paul, but it's really because he's trying to get across a pretty complicated idea of this balance between body and spirit, right? That you're not all spirit, you're not all body, that there is this relationship, right? And we still deal with that today, don't we? This idea of, I don't have to care for the earth, I don't have to care for my body, I don't have to care for it, because we're all going to get, raptured, right? Or the other way is where, spirit means nothing. It's all science, and I just have to be able to see it in order to believe it. Yeah. Is that sort of a thing that you got out of that too, or?
I really feel like Paul, and this was in the Martin commentary, which I really want to talk about some of the commentaries I read.
Oh, yeah.
The J. Lewis Martin commentary on Galatians.
Yep, show it to us. There he is, yep.
He has this idea that, and I've seen this, it's a difficult concept for us as progressive Christians, but spiritual warfare.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
That there is actual spiritual warfare going on. And when Christ enters into this evil age, the Spirit is engaging in the Holy Spirit, the Spirit of God, is entering into this age, which is dominated by the spirit of the flesh.
Yeah.
And that there is an actual struggle going on. And we're caught up in that as followers of Christ. But we don't have to be afraid, because the Spirit is with us, and the Spirit is the one that's engaging in this struggle. And it's hard for us to really not lapse into that kind of language of, kind of warfare language and domination system language and myth of redemptive violence language, but it's also important to acknowledge what Paul is talking about. In Romans, he says we're not struggling against flesh and blood, but against powers and principalities, and that's exactly what he's in Romans. Yeah.
No, that that's the end of Ephesians.
The end of Ephesians.
Yeah, Ephesians 6.
So
yes.
sorry. But that's really what he's talking about, is the power of this present evil age that's ruled by the power of the flesh, which is greed and the spirit of wanting material things. And so to let go of all that and to be ruled by Christ is so radically different, and it involves letting go of all concepts of us and them and duality.
Well, in fact, I think that is the complication of Paul, is that people have this natural tendency. It says, if I'm not winning, then I'm going to seize power in order to overpower you.
Right, exactly.
And that was clearly happening with the people in Galatia, right? Is that there were missionaries, or whatever you want to call them, going to Galatia and saying, oh, no, you need to get circumcised in order to be a good Christian, a real Christian, right? Or you need to follow our way of doing things. And Paul's trying to undo that sort of power grabbing that they were doing. So, I just go, this is why Paul has many different uses and personalities in today's church as well. It hasn't changed.
Yeah. And the thing that is, I think the most eye-opening understanding of this letter, and that sort of circumcision versus uncircumcision debate, came from reading this other book called Galatians Reimagined by Brigette Kahl.
Okay.
Because
you want to show it?
Yeah. Handy.
These are all in the notes, by the way, so for people who want to.
So this book, it's very academic, but she suggests some radical and radically different interpretations of his idea of the law versus the Spirit. Because she suggests that historically the reason many people were suggesting that these Galatians get circumcised was to exempt them from following the state cult.
Oh, okay. Right. Because that would take them out of the norm.
Right.
Yeah.
So Rome was all about law.
Right.
The word in Greek is nomos. And if you even go back to Virgil's Aeneid, for example, I really wanted to quote the Aeneid in my sermons, and I restrained myself.
It's allowed.
It would have been too long. But the Romans prided themselves more than anything else on establishing law and having so-called rule of law in Roman law.
Yeah. And
that law and order, as we see today, is used as a justification for domination and injustice.
Yes.
And so all the stuff that Paul says about law, according to Brigette Kahl, a lot of it is not a reference to the Jewish law of the Torah, but is actually a reference to Roman law. So like there's a part in Galatians that's really mystifying where Paul is really angry at the Galatians. He's like, you foolish Galatians. That's all people remember. Yes. I was talking to my friend Nancy about Galatians. She said, the only thing I remember is you foolish Galatians. But he says, I noticed that you're observing these festivals.
Yeah.
That's one of the things he says. Yeah. And she's like, he's not talking about Jewish festivals.
Yeah,
they all observed Jewish festivals. They were Jews.
Yeah.
He's talking about Roman festivals, which the state cult required them to participate in to be obedient to Rome. So just like Christian nationalists today want to have church and state be the same, for Rome, church and state were the same. So when these Galatians were like, I better like give offerings to the emperor and to the gods of the state, and I better participate in all these festivals, otherwise, right?
Yep. And I mean, that's the tension in Ephesians as well. And I'm glad you mentioned Ephesians 6, because a lot of people think that, most scholars, I think that Ephesians is pseudo-epigraphical, whereas Galatians is a genuine Pauline letter. But I've heard other people say, no, Paul, Ephesians is also a Pauline letter because he had to get under the radar, because the Romans were basically saying, were enforcing their cultic practice. They didn't care what you believed. They just made sure they cared whether you were showing, obeisance to the emperor, right?
And the only people who were exempted from that were Jews. And the way they got around it was...
And that's her argument then?
Right. So the Jews... The residents of Judea did not have to worship the emperor, and they had this very uneasy kind of truce, in which they said, okay, you cannot put a statue of the emperor in our temple,
right?
Because we worship a God that you cannot make images of.
Yep.
It is the number one law of our religion that this God has no image, right?
Yeah.
But here's our compromise. When our priests offer sacrifices to our God who doesn't have an image, we'll pray for the emperor. We will pray on the emperor's behalf that he has just a wonderful health and all that kind of stuff. So that was because, of course, the history of multiple empires, polytheistic empires, conquering that region and encountering this fierce resistance to it's called the abomination of desolation, right? To have an image in the temple. It's like the worst possible thing. Caligula tried it.
Yes.
But, the thing is, so the Romans for a long time were willing to be like, okay, that's fine, we'll do that. Of course, until they just continued to rebel, and then they were like, never mind, we're going to just destroy the temple, in fact, and destroy Jerusalem completely. But for a while, they had this uneasy truce, and so if you were a Jew, you didn't have to participate. So the Galatians, who were fearsome warriors, like, did you ever read Asterix the Gaul when you were growing up? So they were like the big enemies. They were the big enemies of Rome. And they were depicted in Roman literature, in Roman art, as almost monsters, giants, unhuman adversaries.
Well, they were Celts, you know that?
Yeah, very ferocious.
Right. And
you should read Asterix the Gaul. So they're from northern France. They're from Britain. And so they really wanted to show that they were like a part of the empire. And then when some of them started becoming Christian and refusing to participate in those state cults, these incomers came in and said, well, why don't you just get circumcised? Because then you will be able to be exempted. That's Brigette Kahl's argument. And it was very, it was very convincing when I read it.
Sure.
And when and especially because I'm aware that the letter to the Galatians is often used as anti-Jewish theology.
Yeah, yes, right.
And
well, that's a good question then, because regionally, the Galatians were not in the mainstream of the Roman Empire because they weren't along the coast. They were inland people.
Right.
They were originally Celts, or the Celtic, I guess they went and moved to Celtic areas that we consider today. But also, so there was probably a lot of discussion about Roman control.
Absolutely.
Because, you see this in the Asia Minor, which was to the west of this. There was always this concern about, because the Romans could control the seaports and stuff like that, but these interior areas, they couldn't. So, yeah.
Yeah, so that, in terms of the anti-Jewish theology, when you read Galatians as the law is slavery,
yes,
as he goes on and on about how, Abraham had these two wives, and one of them was Sarah, and one of them was Hagar, and one of them is the children of the law, and the other one is freedom. And it's so easy, and you can see how, for people who are anti-Semitic or who are supersessionist, which I'm sure you've talked about on this podcast,
yes.
This idea that, the old law, it's why I don't like to say Old Testament. I like to say Hebrew Bible. The old covenant is really just expired at this point.
Yeah.
Right?
And people misuse Hebrews for this. They'll say, "Oh, it's the replacement. It's the
Right.
Yeah. And I did a podcast episode on that. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's really has led to at best it leads to really ignorant Christians talking about how Jesus is the new covenant and the old covenant has passed away and the Torah is really oppressive,
Well, and that's
at best. At worst, it leads to pogroms, it leads to the Holocaust.
Yeah.
So I think we have to be really careful. And Paul was a practicing Jew. He wasn't just like some rando Jewish guy. He was a teacher of the Jewish law, and he loved the Jewish law. And so he's not saying, oh, nobody needs to get circumcised. Jews shouldn't get circumcised. He's saying, if you are not a Judean, if you are not one of that clan, then of course you don't need to get circumcised, because we are all one in Christ Jesus. It's like Galatians 3:28, which says, there is no Jew or Greek, there is no male or female,
free or slave. Right?
He's not saying, there's no male or female, so you must all become male, right?
Right.
He's saying within the unity of Christ, there's this beautiful diversity, but it's not uniformity. We're all one in Christ Jesus.
You're bringing up a very interesting point, is that people always use Paul for what they want. So so Paul is, in fact, I mentioned this, is that the Galatians, I think, reveals a central problem, and that's why it's such an important letter. And the central problem is that Paul has a constant credibility problem. He has a credibility problem with the hardliners, right? Because he's a compromiser, and you read about this in, Acts 15, the Jerusalem Council. And then, I hope I got that right. And then of course, people who are Gentiles think that he's a hardcore Pharisee, but no, Paul lives in this space between these two groups, and he does today too. So Paul is the most hated apostle by feminists, right? But Paul is also the one that elevated women in leadership the most by far. And it's so what do we do with Paul?
It's so interesting, because I was always on the anti-Paul side. And
for lots of good reasons.
Well, I don't know. I mean, of course, whenever people who are against women's ordination, they'll be like, I do not, allow a woman. But that, I don't think Paul wrote that.
Or he may have written it, but he didn't mean it.
He didn't mean it in
the way we're using
it.
Yeah.
Studying Galatians has really made me appreciate Paul. I think he's really passionate. I think it's interesting because people have questioned his authority because he wasn't around the physical historical Jesus at all.
Yeah.
And the claim to authority that the Jerusalem guys have is, I'm Jesus' brother.
Yeah,
I knew Jesus, right? I was hanging out with him. And here comes this man who encountered the risen Christ.
Yeah.
Like, what does that even mean, that he encountered the risen Christ? He never knew Jesus in real life, right?
And he's way more inclusive than the people in Jerusalem. Yeah. So the question is, I always wondered about this, is that, and of course they end up agreeing with Paul, at least the way we read it.
Yeah.
And that they go, okay, I don't like everything he's saying, but he's doing good work for the church. How often have we heard that or thought that ourselves, right?
Well, and the other thing they say is, maybe he can send us some money.
Right.
Right.
And he does.
They're like, okay, just remember the poor of Jerusalem. And he does.
And he does, yeah.
But
he collects money over in Macedonia.
Yeah. So I do think that is like, oh, we don't really like everything he's saying, but
right, but he's
maybe
good for the faith.
Maybe he'll send us some money. So I do think that he called Peter out.
Yeah.
You know,
right.
He was like, hang on a second. You say that you're like all pally with the Gentiles,
right.
And then, you know, you're not going to eat with them. And so Paul is so passionate, and he's so willing to suffer for what he believes, and he's so willing to act kind of like an idiot. He says the foolishness of the cross is that, you know, it's shaming the wise. So I've gotten to really have a great affection for Paul, and he definitely worked with women a lot. And
yes.
There's actually this.
In fact, he was. My main argument in 1 Corinthians is he's protecting women in 1 Corinthians, especially in the parts that people use against gay people, for example, and chapter 5, 6, and 7. He's protecting women from abuse from these overlord men with sexual impunity, right?
So I have gotten to really. I also love. I mean, here's something gender-based with Paul is when he talks about when he's writing to the Galatians and he's angry and he's shocked and he's horrified. And then at the end he says, I am pleading with you like I'm your mom. He's like, I want to like be like this mother to you. He's not afraid to mix metaphors like that and talk about his feminine side.
Yeah.
And I love at the end where he's like, see what big letters I'm writing with my own hand. Like, somebody else was writing the rest of the letter. And then he's like, just a minute. I got to write this. I need to make my point. So he actually physically wrote that end of the letter.
Right.
And he doesn't have very good eyesight. I think that was his biggest health
probably.
problem, right? So he's writing and he's just like, listen, I've got to get my point across. So I really got a lot of affection for Paul in this study of Galatians.
So I want to kind of shift a little bit because you and I have talked about this, and I've mentioned it before, is there's a relationship between the letter to the Romans and the letter to the Galatians. Scot McKnight points it out. I love Beverly Roberts-Gaventa because she also talks about the letter to the Romans. It was also about peacemaking between Gentiles and Jews, probably somewhat later, probably a decade afterwards or so, maybe even more. And this whole idea of how Romans is used to like lay down the law, especially by modern Calvinist, fundamentalist, Calvinist, hyper, systematic theology people. My favorite, Wayne Grudem, how the Romans is used to create almost like a new Torah. And I go, no, it's about freedom. It's about inclusion. So it's kind of like, how can you use Romans to exclude people? How can you use Galatians to exclude people?
I mean, any kind of words can be, if you have that bias already, where there's this us and them, And I think, when I first became Christian, I got this little pamphlet, and it was like, how do you start reading the Bible?
Right. Yeah.
And they said, you need to read Romans first. Why do you need to read Romans? Because it says all have sinned.
Yes.
All have fallen short. And that's the main thing you have to absorb about this brand of Christianity.
Yeah.
That all have sinned, all have fallen short, and so Jesus, we're all in
the same
Jesus
boat.
died of our sins and so forth. And to me, that's so expansive. I mean, all have sinned, all have fallen short. Like using these words "all," or when it says, in Adam, all have died, and in Christ all are alive. Like all means all. And so, to me, Romans is the most inclusive.
Isn't that crazy?
And expansive, and same with Galatians.
Here we are with these letters that are telling us to grow, to expand who we think is a Christian, to expand who we think is faithful to God. That's where the word Christian can become kind of a problem too, because we say, well, if you're a follower of Jesus, does that mean you fit into the norm, of the church? And I always like to say that if you can use Romans, you can use Paul's letters for universalism as much as you can use it for exclusion. And I'm not going to say whether one's better than the other necessarily, but the idea is that 1 Corinthians 15:22 says all will be made alive in Christ, right? And 1 Timothy 2:6 is another universalist type passage. It says ransom for all. So people really love the ransom part. They love the death and alive part. They love the evangelism part. But they don't like the all part.
No. And that's because we like to feel special. We love to feel special. I love to feel special. Don't you love to feel special?
Yeah.
And there's something about being in this group that is chosen over and against a group that isn't chosen.
Right.
That can make me feel more special. And when Paul, and to me the message of the cross is everyone is equally special.
Yeah.
So yes, it's not that you're not special, it's that they're special also.
So it's kind of like Galatians and Romans, but back to Galatians, it's where do you draw the line? Who's in, who's out? And that's the whole fight in Galatians, right? Is who's in, who's out. And what does all mean? So if all means all people who believe exactly like I do, which is I think what most Christians believe, or does all mean all people who are Catholic, Eastern Orthodox, other kinds of Christianity? Okay, maybe I'll draw the line there. Or does all mean anyone who follows Jesus? Or does all mean anyone who follows God and follows Jesus by proxy, basically? That's where the all is. Where do you draw the line for all? And it's almost like every church.
I mean, what does the word all mean? It means all.
Yes.
It doesn't mean all except those people. It means all. It doesn't even exclude atheists. It doesn't exclude serial killers. I mean, it's everyone. It's
is
all.
Jesus sufficient or not? That's what.
That's really so. At the very end of, I want to talk about the very end of the letter where he wraps it up by saying, neither circumcision nor uncircumcision is anything, but a new creation is everything. God is the one who is always everywhere making all things new.
Yeah.
And in Ephesians, I wish I could quote the chapter and verse, but he says, creating one new humanity. So the idea of a new humanity that is completely united in the cross of Christ. And Now, some atheists might get offended with this and be like, well, don't tell me Jesus died for my sins. Like, I don't even believe in Jesus. But I'm saying it's not about that. It's about expanding our worldview to understand this universalism. Universalism, Christian universalism, means there is no Jew or Greek. There is no Christian or atheist. Making the sign of the cross or not making the sign of the cross is nothing. People want to find, I think Paul is anti-religion, basically. People always, this is what I said at the end of one of my sermons.
That's a little bit controversial, but I think that's a good argument, yes.
It's not about being anti-Judaism, anti-Torah, anti-Roman. It's people always want to find the right formula, the right theology. Like, we don't practice infant baptism.
The right system.
Yeah, exactly. The right system. Is it infant baptism or is it adult baptism? Can you be re-baptized or not? Do you get circumcised or do you not? And Paul is like, none of that means anything. Whether you say the Our Father in this way or whether you say something else, it's nothing. He says it's nothing. What is everything is a new creation. Behold, I make all things new. So the struggle is not between Jew and Greek, male and female, frankly, between us and Christian nationalists. The struggle is between Christ, who entered into this present evil age, which is characterized by these dualities and divisions, to rescue us from that entire system.
I think it's really important for people to realize that these things that we're just talking about, who's in, who's out, and the systems and so forth, are the same arguments that are in the New Testament, especially in how people use Revelation. The people who were putting the canon together didn't want to put Revelation in, but they needed to do something in order to put a capstone on and they needed to have some apocalyptic literature in there. So, and they did it. But and Revelation is gorgeous in a lot of respects. It's amazing in a lot of respects. Really tells us a lot about belief. The problem is that Revelation also contains us and a lot of us and them language, especially toward the end. And you kind of go, well, and the people gravitate on that.
Of course they do.
And that's what they're doing with Paul, I think. Whenever they use Paul for exclusion, is they're just gravitating to this us and them language and completely ignoring the other 95%.
Yeah.
Or completely ignoring the gospel, right?
And you know what? It's all going to be okay. Like, I was thinking about this, Dr. James Dobson passed away recently, as did John MacArthur.
Who's going to be number 3?
So, I was reading a lot of the comments, very, very sad comments on social media about that. And so many us and them, so many people saying how damaged they were, how traumatized they were by their parents following Dr. Dobson's, trying to break you, basically.
Well, because he was all about separation. He was all about us and them. He was all about power and control. So,
and it's, and same with John MacArthur. Oh, and Pat Robertson, didn't he just die?
About 2 or 3 years ago.
Anyway, they're right now, where are they? They're in the throne of glory, all of them, right?
Yeah.
They're being loved. And they're with all of those gay people who have died, and they're with all of those Muslims and atheists.
The best revenge possible.
Well, I mean, it's love.
Yeah.
That's all and maybe that's a very mystical view, but, Julian of Norwich said, God just put God's arm around her and said, you will see for yourself that all shall be well. All shall be well. And so these poor guys, I maybe they were disappointed for a minute when they saw those people with him.
Oh my gosh, why did I say those things? I hope that's what.
But then I think the we cannot fathom the depth of each of our own belovedness.
Yeah.
And so that's the bottom line. And I know it's my job as somebody who's trying to follow the way of Christ to look inside myself and not point the finger at these other people. Anytime, one of my favorite theologians is James Allison, and he says, anytime you find yourself saying, are you with us?
Yeah.
Or are you one of them?
Yes.
You're following that dead system.
Yeah,
You're following that system of the present evil age that Christ came to deliver us from. And it's so tempting to do, because those men that I mentioned definitely thought that I was bad news. And so I want to think they're bad news too. And to continue to ask Christ to pluck that out of my heart.
Well, but let's be careful here, because I don't want people to ever get the impression that you shouldn't oppose them.
Yes.
Because in my last episode, just before this one, is I talk about Dobson a little bit. I talk about MacArthur, and I go, those guys are mostly dead now, right? And Tim Keller, who everybody loves, but Tim Keller was pretty toxic too.
But there's other people who are still alive.
Yeah, but that's the thing, is that there's a whole new generation of people that we have to be careful about. And it's really the way I draw, if you want to, I wouldn't even say draw the line. It's just to say, is anybody who's trying to push people out, trying to say empathy is sin, trying to say that you're not a real Christian, you're not really loved by God unless you do it like me. We have to oppose those people, their ideas, because their ideas are still alive and well.
Yes.
And we're going through a period in history where that's winning. The bullies are winning a little bit, right? So we gotta, Jesus was all about, I think the whole story of the gospel is that the bullies don't win in the end. The people who are trying to push you down and get you to be a nationalist and all that, in the end, they don't win.
They don't win, but they do crucify the Holy One. I mean,
yes.
They get a lot of power. The Roman Empire lasted for, 1,000 years. And so, of course I'm not saying whatever they say, don't argue with. What I'm saying is we continue to speak the truth.
Yeah.
But we remember that we struggle not against flesh and blood, but against powers and principalities.
Yes.
And that spirit, I have no problem using the word evil to describe their theology.
Yeah.
It's evil.
Yes. I think Dobson is clearly was evil.
Yeah.
Clearly,
well, Dobson was, I don't know. I think that he was sucked in. Who knows how he was raised?
Well, he comes from Louisiana, and he was raised in a very strict Baptist, I think his father was a pastor. And, so what he was doing is he was expressing on a world stage his misogyny and racism.
Exactly.
That he grew up with. So, but I think that's really important what you just kind of said, is that here's a man, clearly a broken man in a lot of respects, to have that kind of hateful theology. And you go, okay, let's oppose what he believes in. Let's oppose him, but not to say that, and his evil ideas, because I do believe he was evil, but that we're above that in a way, but not above that, it's the wrong word, is that we can transcend from that. Is that we can resurrect from that. We can resurrect from being crucified, with Jesus. Yeah.
Yeah,
like
it's
Jesus.
Just so dangerous to go into this thing of Dobson was evil and we're good. We are the real Christians. Yep. Because that's the same thing. What I would say is he was a carrier, I would say, of this disease of racism, of white supremacy.
Yes.
Because all of that violence, all those physical beatings that children received and suffered were part of this system of violence that came from the white supremacy and the slavery and all of that stuff. So yes, I want to tell people that was absolutely wrong. And if that happened to you, that was absolutely wrong. You did not deserve that. That is a false doctrine. It's a sinful and evil doctrine.
Yeah. Well, people will say, but for 2,000 years we had this where, we had strict, I go, that doesn't make it right.
Right. So I think, but that's what Paul is saying is all are one. And that anyway, I think that's the danger of it is to get into this us and them.
Well, I think that's the important thing that you're highlighting here is with Galatians, because Galatians is so Pauline. I think that's why Nijay Gupta just loves Galatians so much, because it's kind of like the most Pauline letter, right? And it kind of exposes who Paul is because it's so passionate, but it's also so expansive and freedom-giving. I remember when I was doing my ordination exams, and one of the questions was, what is Galatians' main topic? And the answer was freedom. I go, can you imagine that? And I go, I guess so. But, just being able to internalize that and seeing Paul in a new light. So I'm so glad that you've seen Paul differently. I'm so glad that we can use Paul as a mirror to figure out what is good and truthful and kind and generous and all of the things we hope for in the gospel, and what isn't.
And of course, that's what I can't recite them, but my friend Marcy can recite the fruits of the Spirit.
Yes, right, yeah.
Love, joy, peace, help me out, self-control, those fruits of the Spirit. We can see what, these aren't like, here's what you have to do. They're markers of when we see a community, when we see a community that is devoted to the Spirit, those are the fruits that we see. Yes. And if you look at the opposite, which are the works of the flesh, so-called flesh, the main one is discord. Yeah. The main one is division and trying to get your own way and greed and all of these things. So, I think Paul really lays out, as we say in the United Church of Christ, God has laid before us the way of life and the way of death. Mm-hmm. And that's what Galatians is about. It's about the way of life versus the way of death. Yeah. And that Paul was kind and gentle and did things, but he was also passionate and angry and sometimes petty too. So you kind of have to go, okay, well, Paul's a complete person that we see obviously the New Testament, he's the most complete character in the New Testament. Yeah. So, And he was willing to suffer and pay the price.
Yep.
Which is what we're both going to preach on this Sunday.
That's right,
on the cost of discipleship in Luke 14.
Yeah.
And Paul understood the price. And he understood that he had to let go of his entire identity.
Right. And he felt like he couldn't do anything else. I mean, he felt so compelled to do it. Yeah. So with that, let's wrap up by just saying, look at Galatians in a different way. Look at Paul in a different way. Look at some of the resources that I put in the notes, because I really feel like it is a mirror, and the battles that Paul was dealing with, the difficulties Paul was dealing with, are the same battles we're having today, and we're having them really highlighted in the last few years. So we have to kind of say to ourselves, what does it mean to be a Christ follower? Or even if you're not a Christ follower, what does it mean to be faithful, to be good, to be be in the right path? So thank you, Adina. Is there anything else you'd like to say or close with?
It's just always a pleasure to be on your podcast. I hope you'll invite me back some other time.
Yes. Survey a different book and we'll do that.
Okay.
All right. Well, thank you so much. And like I always say, people say lots of things about the Bible, especially Galatians, especially Paul, that aren't really there. So thank you, and God bless you.